wonderful. So we'll move into the question and answer period now. And I'll start with the question, and then I'm sure people in the audience have questions they'd like to ask. I'm actually going to start with a quote by Anthony Minghella that I came across in a magazine one time years ago. And I don't believe it was even in reference to this movie. I think it may have been in reference to one of his other movies. But he said, an adaptation is a raid on the source material. Again, an adaptation is a raid on the source material. So I was just curious what the panelists think about that idea.
Some of it is just objectively true. A screenplay is like 110 pages long, double space type with kind of big margins. So Blood and Sign My Name is 308 pages, and there are a lot more words on the page. So a lot of stuff's got to go. And it's a book is braided and woven. There are a lot of different stories that get unraveled, but you really much more got to be a sphere with a movie. It's just a different medium that doesn't. Even movies that we think of as being complex and somehow interwoven, it's not. It's not like a book can be. So I think you just have to remember that it's a different. That's a very succinct way as movie stories are of saying something that's really fundamentally just a matter of fact.
Other thoughts about that?
Well, a couple of things he said to me. I mean, one of the things he said, and I actually believed it. He said, it's good to go into dealing with Hollywood with a lot of suspicion of carefulness. But he had said early on, I don't care how much money this movie makes, what the critical reaction is. If you don't like it, I will never consider it a true success. And I do think he meant that. But we also did talk a lot about he said the first time you see the screenplay, you're gonna see a lot of my rooms with your furniture. That's very much the way it turned out. There was a time in Romania where he was filming a scene in that old mill, and he got after 20 takes of the same scene, he turned around to me and said, "This is in the book, right?" And I honestly could not remember. It's been 7 years. We both took that as a good sign that we weren't totally sure where that scene came from.
I might have had a different experience. Final Rounds has had 4 screenplays done, 3 by 2 very top screenwriters, and I did the last one. And that's the one that looks like it might get made. In fact, I'm going to New Zealand in a couple of weeks to talk to a big financier, mysterious guy sitting at the edge of the world. It's also, I've gotten the same kind of calls from a dozen very well-known male actors who realize there aren't a lot of great roles for an 80-year-old actor and a 50-year-old. So I learned a lot from writing the screenplay. I had a guy named David Picker, who's a very famous Midnight Cowboy, and he's the guy that's my partner in this thing. He made Chariots of Fire and all these wonderful films. He's really extraordinary. He basically admitted United Artists, made all the Bond films, brought the Beatles to America. So he's really a great guy, and he loves this. He sounds like Anthony. He really cares about this film. He wants it to move away. So when he kind of held my hand through writing the screenplay, what I learned was, as he kept saying to me, nothing in a film is wasted. It's the ultimate economy. You really have to move the story along. Assume the person watching it is really done, and you're taking them into this labyrinth and you're leading them through it. So really, there are no, unless it's a mystery or whodunit or red herring is needed in a detective film. It's straightforward, especially a film. My stories are obviously very quiet stories, although Final Rounds has some really terrible things that happen myself that are in the middle of this book, which is why it surprised so many people. And when I got to I learned a lot, and even I have to say, I even had to invent things for my screenplay. There were moments that in the books, we were in Scotland, and these critical life moments happened, and my dad and I, we talked about things that we never talked about, and I needed a vehicle, so I invented it. It was, I had to grit my teeth to do it, because these are memoirs, and they're, some of my students, and when I was teaching in Holland, would say, is this fiction, or did this really happen? In fact, I was teaching a class here yesterday, and one of the students came up to with Faithful Travelers, and she said, oh, I just love this book. It reminded me of my dad. Have you written any other novels? Actually, it's a memoir, which means that it's an actual event that happened. So that was one kind of revelation to me. And the second one was, and now I guess we'll go all these times, if Final Rounds gets made, I've gotten it, I've now been through the fire, and I'm going to make sure it's made in North Carolina and Scotland only, and we debut it here, and it has all of you are going to be extras in the film. Start working on your Scottish brogues. It's an interesting process. I hope it happens. And then the irony of, I'm a historian and a biographer and a memoirist. I just got a phone call about a big biography I wrote about Ben Hogan, who's probably the most mythic figure in American sports, and hidden. And it took me 4 years. And my wife, who's back there somewhere, can tell you she was so glad to get Ben Hogan out of her life. A really tough, difficult guy who had a very secret sort of life. And I've had calls from agents and film people, and we got a call from just the other day when they wanted this big group wants to make it a film, and I suppose they wanted to consult. I hope to God they don't make the screenplay. And I'd be interested to see, because this guy's life was both part myth, intentional, obscuring things, and had the hardest life of anybody who's ever heard. So it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out. You can't be extras in that.
The producer calls and says, we need you to sign a 50-page document in the next 10 minutes. You're not going to do that.
Yeah, I've gone to Romania.
Okay, so are there questions? Yep.
Thanks for coming to Greenville, by the way. Since you've all had the experience of having your writing put onto the screen.
Yeah, great, thank you.
And for better or for worse, we watch a lot of media these days. I don't know if we read as many books as we used to, but I don't know how to turn it on. That's it?
Behind you.
I'll talk loud for this question.
We're taping this, Eric. That's what we're
Oh, okay.
There, it's on. I think the battery's dead. Oh, there we go.
Try again? Hello?
No, okay.
Okay.
Just talk.
And for better or worse, we make and watch a lot of media these days. Do you feel like, either through your own experience, enjoy, hopefully next time, James, it'll be a joyful experience, that impacts your novel writing, that you find yourself tempted to be, I don't know, more cinematic, or does it get mixed up, the novel language versus the filmic language, or are you still purely a novelist, as you were before you had experience in making a movie?
Well, for me, I'm very visual in my thinking. I'm not a very abstract thinker. I go out, when I'm working on a book, I go out and do, long before any movie connection would do this, go out and do location scouting for scenes in a book. Feeling that if I could, the fewer things I have to make up from scratch, the better off I am. So if I have a scene like in Cold Mountain when Snodrod and the Pangle Boy are shot by the Home Guard, I found a place that I wanted that to happen over near the Cataloochee Valley in the Smoky Mountain National Park. I just went and sat there and wrote in a notebook just everything about the description of it. And then the description was done. All I had to do was draw a map of it, and then people moved in a logical way. You don't have people constantly, tripping over themselves and losing their hats and things like that. So I don't know that I don't know that the experience of being around the movie has changed the way I write just because of the way I tend to think.
Any questions? Who else?
This is for all panels, but as an example, I read Cold Nothing after I watched the movie, and it's very hard for me to picture like Ada with black hair, for instance. Does seeing the movie versions of the characters, does that change your mental conception of your characters?
They asked me if I would repeat the question so they can get it on tape. To see the movie version of your characters change your interpretation of your characters?
The way you see them.
The way you see them?
I think again, just saw that as Anthony's vision of the characters versus mine. Ruby in the movie is a more humorous character, or at least humorous in a broader way. She's much nicer to her father. In the book, she is much harsher with this deadbeat father of hers, and is never going to trust him fully again. There's no warm, fuzzy element to Ruby. And she is warmer and fuzzier. Interesting watching it because Renee Zellweger would do take after take after take, and she would do a whole range of readings. And some of them were funnier, some of them were broader, some of them were more serious. Nicole Kidman knew the character she wanted to do and didn't want to give in editing room to change that, and she did. She had one character that she was acting, so they picked the broader version of Ruby in editing. I kind of wish they'd gone for the slightly harsher one.
I can tell you a funny story, a similar experience today when Final Rounds was the second version. They flew me to play golf with Dennis Quaid and James Garner. And Garner was really keen on being the father of the movie, and Quaid just made a movie called The Rookie, and it kind of saved his career. And I showed up at Bel Air, and I knew the pro. I was working on the big Hogan book at the time, so it was fun. And we go to have Garner's having breakfast tonight. You're meeting a big movie star. Now, I've been a journalist for 40 years. I've met a lot of famous people, but it was kind of fun to go in and meet Maverick. He's having breakfast. Joe Namath's sitting over here. Some guy famous from a soap opera sitting over here. A lot of famous guys. And Garner says, just as nice as he can be, and he says, well, Dennis is not here. He's already out on the range warming up. He heard you're a good golfer. It's not really true. And he came in, and he had a torn shirt and old jeans. He looked like he'd just fallen out of a cab at about 40 miles an hour. And we get in the cart, and he says, oh, I hear people love this book, and I don't really want to be in it. I love Jim Garner, and it's just going to be great. And he said, unfortunately, I've got my blank, 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 blank wife, and I are getting a divorce, Meg Ryan. And it proceeded the next 10 minutes to spew an unprintable stream of venom on this poor woman. And then so we're getting on the first tee, and so Dennis and I are going to, David Picker, this producer, and Dennis are going to play Jim Garner. And so the first thing Quaid does, he gets up there, this is after an hour of warming up, he takes 10 or 20 seconds to set up. I know there's probably a couple golfers in the group. Takes a huge backswing and pauses in this backswing. You could fit him for a suit in this backswing. and then lashes the ball and it goes over the fence. I didn't know. And he said, wait, he announced himself as a one handicap, which is almost professional level. And the first thing that went through my mind, I turned to Jim Garner and I said, the first thing we do when we go to Scotland is, I don't want this guy on film portrayed as me, because my golf swing is not that ugly. That is my golf swing. And especially because he was so nasty all the way around. All he did was talk trash about his wife. And then we played around. We had cleaned their clock about halfway around, and we finished up. And we're going up at the end. He goes, yeah, I haven't read this book, but I'm going to read it. I got to go. I'm going to make a movie called The Day After Tomorrow, a disaster film. And he said, and after I make that, I'm going to make this. It's going to be awesome and beautiful. Thanks a lot. I got to go. Classic movie star. We go in, there's Jim Garner sitting there. We're going to have lunch, and he says, what'd you think of Dennis? Well, First off, I followed Dennis into the pro shop to thank the pro, and they have a thing where you put your score in. I had Dennis down for 85. Dennis typed in 74, which is why he's the one handicapped. And then we go into, Jim Garner goes, what do you think about Dennis? And I said, well, he's an interesting guy. I said, he's playing a little more Hamlet than I do when I play golf. But and if we go to Scotland, we got to do two things. First of all, we got to give this guy a golf swing, and secondly, we got to teach him the rules of the game, or the Scots will run us out. So it is funny how you can imagine somebody on the screen, especially playing yourself. I'm sure Tim had that experience. Now, from James David, whatever his name is, I've always wanted to wear a Navy uniform to put people in prison. You know, that guy played faithful terrible stuff.
Questions? Yeah.
Considering your experience with having works of yours adapted into films by other screenwriters who write them into screenplays, and then by a director who interprets the screenplay and then puts it on a film, knowing that process, has it given you any type of motivation to actually go out and maybe direct or adapt any of your own works into screenplays yourself?
So having been through the adaptation process, does it motivate you to want to be the screenwriter or director yourself?
I could certainly see being the screenwriter. Being a director is like being a general. I mean, you're in charge of food, bathrooms, firing lots of people, hiring lots of people. It's just really, if you're qualified to be Napoleon and invade the rest of the continent, then perhaps you'd like to be a director. It's just, you're the captain of a pirate ship. I am not good at that. I wouldn't. But the history is fiction as well, because you're taking real stuff and real places. Actually, when I was listening to Charles talk about scouting locations in his writing, I thought, yeah, I mean, so I've got all this evidence and these characters, and I've got more stuff that I can put in the book, and it takes place in a place, but it's a fiction in a way, because you're taking all this evidence, you're not making it up, but life's not a story. It's a big, messy, we turn it into stories because we're storytelling creatures. That's how we make meaning. That's how we tell each other who we are. We listen to each other's stories. Families create stories that sort of tell them who they are, what matters to them. So a historian and a novelist, it seems to me, are not so different in the way we come at things. And then when you get the movie piece of it, I think that's an interesting other layer of storytelling. I think it's to work with that. Both that I've worked on a documentary film of one of my books, and then on this Hollywood kind of movie and independent movie, and it's struck me that it's fascinating. It made me think that it would be great to learn to write a screenplay. I have done. I don't know if y'all know Mike Wiley, but Mike Wiley is he's about 35, he's a brilliant African-American playwright and actor in North Carolina, and spends a bunch of his time in public schools. He does these history plays, and just makes history. He does historical research, and then he just makes it walk and talk. He's just a genius. He's magnificent. And I've worked with him on 2 different plays. One a play version of Blood Inside My Name, and another thing on the Freedom Prize. But having already done that before was involved in making the Blood movie, I tried different ways of storytelling. And I think it's just challenging and interesting, and I'm not sure it's making a movie is very much a group thing, whereas and I find writing that way somewhat pretty collaborative, but at the same time, it's a lot lonelier writing a book than it is a movie. I just loved it, but it's a challenge. I thought that would be great, but I couldn't be the director. no way, no how. I watch the camera. Whenever I see there's a scene in the film, and whenever I see that scene, all I can think of is that the sound of that $250,000 camera hitting the pavement, turning into little bits of things. And there was another one in the whole Southeast. We had to get that kind of camera, very special kind of camera. And there wasn't one with, the other one was on the far side of Atlanta. Somebody had to drive very fast and get it. And persuade those people to part with it. But there was just a lot of, the director thing was just, took a level of skill.
Way too much organization.
Oh,
Let me just, on Gold Mountain, there were 250 drivers. It was just amazing, the level of organization. I could do one. There's a director I really like named Kelly Reichert, and I read an interview with her, and she said, we make our movies pretty bare bones. We don't have catering. We send the guy to Subway. Maybe that. In terms of screenplays, I don't know whether it's just me, but I have the hardest time reading screenplays. So I feel like until I learn how to understand how to read one, that maybe I'll not to stick my finger in and try to write one. The only one I've ever read that I understood was Werner Herzog's screenplay for Aguirre. If anybody, if you've seen that movie, there's not much dialogue. And the screenplay's like a summary. It'd be like Aguirre is floating down the Amazon on a raft full of monkeys. And that I can understand. I don't understand screenplays when I read them.
yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about historical films and interpretation and point of view? And I asked this question in the context of the film like health. Whereas in that film, domestic workers were framed until Skeeter came along as these very passive kind of people. But anyone who knows anything at all about the civil rights movement knows that domestic workers were, in a real sense, the backbone of it in terms of organizing in the economic structure and economic support and providing safe haven for civil rights workers and so forth. Can you talk about that in the context of how those narrow interpretations impact the whole of society, and particularly young people?
That's the thing that frustrates me. Historians wince when Hollywood turns historian, because it's not, they think that getting the clothes right and the cars right and the music right is really authenticity, and the truth of things is just a mess. So in my field, all the movies, I hate them all, except for Danny Glover made a movie called Freedom Song. It's a wonderful movie about the civil rights movement. And I like Blood Guns on my neck. The rest of them, I'm pleased to report. I could have counted on that. In fact, the rest of them, it's the good white folks versus the bad white folks. And everybody's clearly identifiable. And then black folks are just sort of wallpaper that sings hymns and gets lynched. Black folks in the movies that I know, the history movies I know, serve to underline the evil of the bad white folks and to verify the goodness of the good white folks. Stand up this King Louis, your father's passing. It's just, that's what black people do, is sort of, the black characters will verify the goodness of some white people. And then others will point toward the evil. So the thing is a struggle between white people who were not much involved, you know, and so these are very, I consider them to be, they undo the work of historians, and you leave the movie theater knowing less than when you went in, and that's it's a very discouraging kind of thing, and you know, that's a fearful thing to think that your work could end up, you know, undoing your work, that your work could be used to undo your work, and that's the commerce of it. And now that my story of getting the call about Radio Free Dixie and having Robert Williams wanting a white hero. They wanted me to cough up a white hero. I mean, I'll give them credit for honesty. I mean, they were like, no white hero, no movie. You know, we had clarity. There was clarity in my response. But that's the perilous situation in which historical movies involving African American themes get made, and they're always trying to make a movie that tells you a story you already know in a way you already know it, you know. So they want to tell you a story you already know. It's new and different, but it's just like this other. And so we end up with, you know, buddy movies and you know, a lot of add water and stir, redemption, and just lies and big lies, though. You know, we worry about the little stuff, but really at the end of the day, you know, Mississippi Burning is worse than it's worse than never a movie ever being made about the Civil Rights Movement. It should have never been made. I wish it didn't exist. You know, and it's just pernicious, the very idea. So they use history as a kind of backdrop for their, you know, Girl Meets Boy, or their Western, or they're telling some story that's really a story you already know, but they're just using the Black freedom struggle as a kind of setting, you know, so that they can tell the story that they want to tell. And it doesn't have to be that way, because as you know, Dante, the truth of the matter is much more exciting than anything you can make up. I feel as a historian, I have as much liberty as a novelist, because hell, everything happened. You know, if you want evidence, I've got it. I can footnote it. You know, life is strange, and all kinds of things are happening, and there are a lot of different stories, and the Black freedom struggle is full of irony and drama that cannot be matched, and humanity and all of its brokenness and glory. You just can't beat it, and yet they want to, you know, make up some crap. So it's hard to know, and then they've got all the money. You know, so they're calling the shots in a certain way, and that's tricky. So where do you sign up? And I was working with a guy who's named after a Confederate general, and he had, you know, all of his movies seem to have Eddie Murphy in them, or, you know, like they're very, very commercial, shall we say. Beverly Hills Cop 2 is not the kind of, you know, no offense, but that's not what I did not think, oh yeah, that's the logical person. But I had to go on my gut, which was that he did understand, and that he seemed to really get it. And I also thought he would listen to me. And that turned out to be the case, but, you know, we enter around our peril. Well,
let me ask a follow-up, if that's okay. Talk a little bit more about these misinterpretations or misrepresentations of history and their impact on contemporary society, particularly young people, and not to typecast young people, who are often not really aware or immersed in history, the civil rights movement, and the women's movement, and beyond.
Sure. I mean, the problem with Mississippi Burning, for example, which is kind of archetypal, but I mean, I could name a lot of other movies that sort of do the same thing. But you end up getting the civil rights movement as a Western, starring, the good white folks versus the bad white folks. And the good white folks have come into the civil rights, injustice happens on the frontier. It's out there in a part of America that doesn't work too well yet. At the center of things, of course, everything's fine. But out there in some corner of America, there's some rednecks. They got a bolt sticking out of his neck, right? The Southern hippie, got Michael Rooker. He's the best, right? And it's Southern Frankenstein, versus a saint or a group of saints. And these saints sort of ride in from Washington, D.C., and they rescue the poor black folks are just singing hymns, and they're just being redemptive. As black guys are, And they're sort of, Lord have mercy. And then we just don't know what to do. I'm thinking, no, that's kind of pump shotgun in his truck, you're crazy. But you don't know what to do. I think he didn't know what to do. But then the white people ride in and save the day, and they're willing to, but the way they save the day is they break the rules. You got to crack some eggs to make an omelet. So they're going to come in and the one of them wants to say, now this is not in the rule book. And the other one says, damn it, to hell with the rule book. We're going to save these Negroes. It's just what you get. And so you end up with young people who think that their people needed saving, and other young people who think that their folks rode in and saved people. So what are these people complaining about? After all, my people saved them for pathetic things. So you end up with people, and it's worse than useless. Very much worse than useless. Because that's what people learn their history from. The movies are teaching more history than I can. They teach history faster than I can. So it's, and that frustrates me as a teacher, that people walk in my classroom knowing a lot of things that just have no relationship whatsoever to reality. And people who told that story think it was good because they got the model of the car right. I mean, damn. But it doesn't, I'm persuaded, though, that it doesn't have to be that way. That if we tell the stories as best we can, and we try hard and educate the filmmakers and stick close by them. It's not I don't think there's anything dirty, about getting in there and trying. Because, there's nothing clean about being irrelevant. You can't just stand back and let, Steven Spielberg or somebody do your job for you and then just at dinner complain about it. That's not ethical. You've got to get in there and help and let the story be told, but told well. We could do a lot better. And I don't think it's all the filmmakers' fault, because they come at things in a certain, they're in an industry and they come in with certain traditions and tropes and conventions, the way that scholars and poets all do too. So I just think we got to get in there and weigh in more, and it can be done. But
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes, so we're getting down to the nitty-gritty.
We read
Cold Mountain and Blood Dents on my name in Dr. Bauer's class, and we had the pleasure of also reading Dr. Tyson's article in the NCLR. And I wanted to know if Brussels sprout, or if you would have been cast as Vernon Tyson, if your memoir would have turned into a movie that was the nice white man. And my main question is, who is Brussels sprout?
Who is Brussels sprout?
Yeah, I need to probably clarify who haven't read the article.
In the article, I was telling about one of the crazy things that happened. You know, I had this filmmaker, Jeff Stewart, and all his work was really, really commercial. And he's not very artsy. He says, I make movies, not films. You know, and almost probably sort of not artsy. I like that personally, but it did worry me a little bit. But I had the sense that he would do a good job. I did not know that Russell Crowe's agent had called us. It was almost time to make this movie, and we had no leading man. I mean, it was really like 3 weeks, 2 weeks, tick, tick, to start shooting this movie, and we didn't have a leading man. And we had gone through this a lot of times. Everybody's agent was calling, and it'd be exciting, so-and-so. And then it wouldn't work out. And what happened with Brussels sprout is what I called it in this article. Anyway, they called up and said, you know, Mr. Crowe really, you know, really wants to play Vernon Tyson. He thinks this will be a defining role for him, you know, for the rest of his career. This is a powerful thing. And I'm thinking, that's great. Because people, you know, we'll get people to come see that movie. That's your guaranteed blockbuster. And we can borrow, we're out of money, you know, and you got to have, at the end of it, we had no money, and really we needed $30 million to promote the film properly. We needed a lot of dough. We didn't have it. But I didn't have anything to do with it. I'm no way financial effective. I just happened to know it. I was rooting for it. But, and so the agent says, well, you know, Mr. Crowe really this is going to be, it's very important to me, really wants to be Vernon Tyson. We just have a few little problems with the script. Just a couple of little small things. You know, Mr. Crowe has been accustomed to playing roles in which the character, you know, has more of an impact on the story. You know, maybe in the ending, we were kind of hoping that basically they want him to be the hero. In other words, they want a white hero again. Who they want my dad to be a white hero. Now, you know, I wish that he had been able to save the situation in Oxford and transform American history in a redemptive way. That would be lovely. And if he had done that, that's how I would have written it. Because I love the man. But, you know, that was my nightmare. But the problem is, look at the thing. I'm putting myself, if I had known that, I mean, they called Jeff, not me. I don't know what I'd have said. Jeff told me to go to hell. In the article, I'm much too polite. He really told me to go to hell. And the script is the script. We'd love to have it. If he likes Vernon Tyson, that'd be terrific. So, we'll take it. But, you know, forget it. You know, we're not doing it. And he was much, I would have been like, you know, I think it's a complicated choice. You want people to, it's the politics of being heard. You want to be heard on the one hand, and then you want to be true. But if you're true and nobody hears you, that's not good either. So I've been trying to say, well, what exactly could he have in mind? Where'd he get out? Maybe I would, you know, by the time I heard about it, it was over. I keep it, go to hell. I thought, that was my, so me, on the one hand, go like, well, couldn't we work it out? And Jeff, the commercial movie maker, was going to sell the people in the little town down the river, right? He just said, forget it. So he's the one, and I thought that was hilarious. But, you know, I'll answer your question.
Okay, well, sadly, we're out of time, so that we get, in order for us to stay on schedule for the rest of the day, we're going to have to wrap this up. But thank you all for your questions, and thank you all for coming, and thank you very much to our panelists.